The first sign that something is wrong isn't the doll. It's the road. Late at night, with rain smearing the windshield and thunder rolling somewhere far behind them, Ed and Lorraine Warren are bringing Annabelle home, and the air inside the car feels heavier with every mile. Lorraine keeps glancing at the back seat, not because she wants to, but because something back there wants to be seen. The doll sits upright in silence, wedding dress white in the dark, face frozen in that same dead little smile. Then the radio crackles. Static, a voice, and the car dies. Ed tries the engine again. Nothing. Wipers stop mid-swipe. For one terrible second, the whole world outside the windshield goes black, like the night itself has leaned in close. Lorraine feels it before she sees it. Spirits gathering. Angry. Drawn to the doll like moths to a cursed flame. Figures begin to move beside the road, pale shapes appearing where there should be only trees and rain. A priest had warned them already. Annabelle isn't possessed. She's bait. A key left in a door. Something inhuman uses her to invite other things inside. And now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, that door is hanging wide open. Back at the Warren house, everything looks safe. Warm lamps, framed family photos, soft music floating through the rooms. Their daughter Judy lives inside that safety, like a child trying to believe the world makes sense. She knows her parents help people. She knows their basement is off limits. She knows there are objects in that locked room. No one talks about for long. School isn't much easier. The other kids whisper, they stare. Some of them think her parents are frauds. Others think they're worse. Judy keeps her head down, but there's one thing she can't stop wondering. If evil is real for everyone else, why does it always feel so close to her? Mary Ellen, Judy's babysitter, arrives with the energy of someone pretending not to be nervous. She's kind, steady, older in the way teenagers sometimes seem when they walk into a child's life and immediately become a shield. Judy likes her, trusts her. That matters. Because tonight, Ed and Lorraine are leaving town for one night only, and before they go, Lorraine kneels in front of Judy and holds her face with both hands. She smiles, but it doesn't quite reach her eyes. Stay out of the artifact room. Simple words. Calm voice. But Judy hears the warning underneath. Not, don't touch, don't even look. The kind of warning adults give when fear has already shown them what happens next. And that room. God. It sits behind blessed glass and heavy locks at the end of the hallway, like the house's buried heartbeat. Shelves packed with relics, masks, wedding dresses, music boxes, cracked mirrors, things that should have been destroyed but couldn't be. The Warrens don't keep trophies. They keep prisons. Every object inside is tagged, documented, contained. Holy symbols hang over the door. Prayers have been spoken into the walls. At the center sits Annabelle in her special case, boxed behind glass carved with scripture, the words glowing softly when the light hits just right. Warning. Positively do not open. Even standing near that room feels wrong, as if the air has to push harder to move. That evening should have been ordinary. Pizza, homework, a little TV, Judy trying to act older than she is, Mary Ellen trying to act less bored than she feels. But ordinary doesn't survive long in that house, especially not when Daniela arrives. She's Mary Ellen's friend, all bright smiles and restless curiosity, the kind of girl who walks into a room already looking past it, searching for the hidden door. She says she just wanted to hang out. She says she heard Mary Ellen was babysitting and thought it would be fun, but there's something tight behind her smile, something grieving and desperate. She's heard about the Warrens, about the room, about objects that connect the living to the dead. And grief can make any locked door look like mercy. Judy doesn't trust her, not fully. She watches Daniela's eyes drift down the hallway one too many times, watches her laugh too quickly, ask too casually, lean just a little too close whenever the artifact room is mentioned. Mary Ellen doesn't notice. Or maybe she does and thinks it's harmless. Teenagers are good at that, mistaking danger for curiosity, mistaking curiosity for courage. But Judy knows what her mother's face looked like before she left. She knows how the house sounds when it's quiet. She knows there are nights when the floorboards settle and it doesn't sound like wood. It sounds like footsteps. Later, after Judy goes to bed, the house falls into that strange midnight stillness where every tiny noise feels chosen. Daniela wanders, slow at first, then sure, past the family photos, past the hallway table, toward the locked room. Her breathing changes when she reaches the door, like she's standing at the edge of something sacred or unforgivable. She finds the keys. Of course she does. Hands trembling, she unlocks the door and slips inside, eyes shining with hope so raw it barely looks human. She isn't chasing a thrill. She wants one impossible thing: to hear from her dead father one more time. Just once. Just enough to survive missing him. But grief doesn't care what it opens. Her flashlight glides over cursed glass and silent faces. The room seems to wake around her, objects catching light like eyes opening in the dark. She finds Annabelle at the center, still and patient in her case. Daniela steps closer, reads the warning, swallows. And then, somewhere behind her, something knocks once from inside the room. Not loud, just enough. She turns, and when she looks back at the case, the latch is moving. The glass doesn't shatter. It just opens. Slow, quiet, like it was never meant to stay closed. Daniela freezes, her breath caught somewhere between fear and hope, staring at Annabelle now sitting exposed in the dim light. Nothing happens. No scream, no shadow lunging from the dark. Just silence. And that's what convinces her. Maybe it's not as dangerous as they said. Maybe the Warrens exaggerated. Maybe, just maybe, this is her chance. Her fingers tremble as she reaches forward, ignoring the warning etched into the case. The moment her skin brushes the doll's dress, something shifts. Not in the room, in the air. Behind her, a glass cabinet creaks open on its own. Daniela spins around. Her flashlight flickers, catching glimpses. An old wedding dress, swaying slightly though there's no wind. A rusted suit of armor tilting just enough to feel alive. A mirror reflecting something that isn't her. She steps back, heart racing now, that fragile hope cracking into something colder. "Hello?" she whispers, but the word dies before it reaches the walls. Because the room isn't quiet anymore. It's listening. Every object, every shadow, every cursed thing in that room awake. And then she hears it. A voice. Soft, familiar, broken. Daniela. Her entire body locks. That voice. Her father's voice. The one she's replayed in her head 1,000 times. The one she thought she'd never hear again. Tears hit her eyes instantly. "Dad?" Her voice shakes, barely holding together. She takes a step forward, then another, following the sound like it's pulling her through the air itself. This is why she came. This is what she needed. One moment, one word, proof that he's still somewhere. But something about it is wrong. The voice comes again, closer now. "I'm here, too close." Daniela turns sharply, and there's nothing there. Just the room, just the objects. Just that unbearable feeling crawling under her skin like she's not alone inside her own body anymore. The flashlight cuts across a mirror, and for a split second, she sees a man standing behind her. Not her father. Something else. She gasps, stumbling back, hitting a shelf. A music box tumbles, lands with a dull thud, and suddenly, it starts playing on its own. Slow. Warped. The melody dragging like it's being pulled through water. Daniela backs away, panic rising fast now, that hope completely gone. She doesn't want answers anymore. She wants out. Now. She runs for the door, fumbling with the lock, hands shaking so badly she can barely grip the key. Behind her, something moves fast. Too fast. A shadow crosses the room, then another. The music box snaps shut. Silence. And then, a hand touches her shoulder. Cold. Daniela screams, spinning around, but there's no one there. Nothing. Just the open case behind her. And Annabelle is gone. Down the hallway, Judy's eyes snap open. She sits up in bed, breath uneven, listening. The house feels different. Not quiet. Not safe. Alive in the worst possible way. She hears something downstairs. A soft, dragging sound. Then a whisper. Her heart starts pounding as she slides out of bed, moving toward her door. She knows that feeling. She's felt it before when her parents bring something new into the house. That pressure in the air. That wrongness. Something has been let out. "Mary Ellen?" Judy calls softly, stepping into the hallway. No answer. But from the darkness below, something whispers back. And it knows her name. Judy doesn't move at first. Her name, whispered from the dark like someone testing how it feels in their mouth. Her chest tightens, breath shallow, eyes locked on the staircase below. "Mary Ellen?" She tries again, louder this time. Still nothing. But the house answers in its own way. A slow creak from the hallway, a faint thump from downstairs, like something wandering, learning the shape of the place. And then, a giggle. Soft, childlike, wrong. Judy steps back instinctively, her heel hitting the wall behind her. No, no, no. That sound doesn't belong here. Not in this house. Not tonight. She turns and rushes toward Mary Ellen's room, knocking quickly before pushing the door open. "Mary Ellen, something's." She stops. The room is empty. Bed untouched. Lights off. Windows slightly open. Curtains swaying even though the air feels dead still. Judy's pulse spikes. This isn't normal. None of this is normal. "Mary Ellen?" she calls again, voice cracking now. No answer. Just silence pressing in from every corner. Downstairs, something crashes. Judy flinches, heart slamming against her ribs. She shouldn't go down. She knows that. Every instinct screams at her to stay put, to hide, to wait for her parents to come back. But Mary Ellen is down there, maybe Daniela too. And that protective instinct, that need to not be alone, pushes her forward. Step by step, she descends the staircase. Each step groans under her weight, louder than it should be. The house feels stretched, like the shadows have grown longer, thicker. She grips the railing tightly, eyes scanning the living room as it slowly comes into view. Everything looks almost the same. Furniture in place, lamps still glowing softly. But there's a tension in the air now, like the room is holding its breath. "Mary Ellen?" she whispers. A figure moves in the corner. Judy's head snaps toward it, but there's nothing there. Just a coat hanging on a chair. Still, silent. She exhales shakily, stepping off the last stair, trying to steady herself. Okay, she mutters, more to herself than anything. Then the TV flickers on. Static fills the screen. Judy jumps back, a small gasp escaping her lips. The sound crackles, loud and sharp in the quiet room. She stares at it, frozen, as the static begins to shift. Shapes forming, distorting, and then a face. Pale, twisted, smiling. Judy screams, grabbing the nearest object, a remote, and hurls it at the TV. The screen goes black instantly. Silence crashes back in. Too fast. Too quiet. Behind her, footsteps. Judy slowly turns. Nothing. But she feels it. Right behind her, that cold presence pressing against her back like breath without warmth. She squeezes her eyes shut for a second. Don't turn, don't look. But she does anyway. And there, just for a blink, a little girl stands in the hallway. Thin, pale, eyes too wide. And then she's gone. Judy stumbles backward, nearly falling, panic flooding every nerve in her body. "Mary Ellen!" she screams now, no longer caring about being quiet. "Daniela!" Her voice echoes through the house, but it doesn't sound like hers anymore. It sounds smaller, lost. Upstairs, a door slams shut violently. Judy looks up. That wasn't the wind. That was something else. And deep inside the house, something just locked them all in. The slam echoes like a gunshot through the house. Judy flinches, her entire body locking up as the sound vibrates through the walls, through her chest, through her bones. That wasn't random. That wasn't the house settling. Something chose that moment. Something heard her. Her breathing turns sharp, uneven, as she stares up the staircase again, fear tightening around her throat like invisible fingers. "Mary Ellen," she whispers, but even she knows. Whatever answered earlier, it wasn't her. Upstairs, Daniela isn't running anymore. She's hiding. Curled behind a half-open door, knees pulled tight to her chest, flashlight clutched so hard her fingers ache. Tears streak silently down her face as she tries to control her breathing. In, out, quiet. Don't make a sound, because something is walking down the hallway. Slow, dragging. A soft scrape, step, it stops right outside the door. Daniela freezes completely, her body refusing to even tremble now. Silence presses in so hard it hurts her ears. Then, knock. Once, soft, her eyes snap shut. No. She doesn't answer. She doesn't move. But the door creaks open anyway, inch by inch, like something on the other side has all the time in the world. The flashlight flickers, and in that broken light, she sees feet. Bare, pale, standing just inside the doorway. Her breath shatters into a sob as she looks up. Nothing. The hallway is empty. The door fully open now. But the feeling doesn't leave. It's still there. Closer. Behind her. Daniela turns slowly. And the music box melody starts again, right next to her ear. She screams, scrambling away, crashing into the wall, the sound echoing wildly as panic takes over completely. "Leave me alone," she cries, her voice cracking apart. But the room answers with something worse than noise. Laughter. Low. Crooked. Not human. Downstairs, Judy hears it. Her head snaps toward the ceiling, eyes wide with terror. That wasn't imagination. That was real. Someone, something, is upstairs with Daniela. "No," she whispers, shaking her head as fear and determination collide inside her chest. She can't just stand here. She can't. She runs. Up the stairs, fast. Each step louder than the last, heart pounding like it might burst. "Daniela!" she shouts, voice breaking. "Where are you?" The hallway greets her with darkness thicker than before, the lights flickering like they're struggling to stay alive. A door at the end creaks open on its own. Judy stops. Stares. Her instincts scream at her to run the other way. But Daniela could be in there. Hurt. Alone. That thought pushes her forward again, slow this time, careful, every step measured. Inside the room, something shifts. Judy reaches the door, hesitates. Then, she steps in. Empty. At first glance, nothing. Just shadows and silence. Then the closet door rattles violently. Judy jumps back, gasping, her hands flying to her mouth as the handle twists back and forth, faster, harder, like something inside is trying to break out. "No, no," she whispers, backing toward the wall. The rattling stops. Instantly. Silence. Too sudden. Too clean. Judy swallows hard, staring at the closet, every muscle in her body locked. She shouldn't open it. She knows that. Every story, every warning, every instinct. But then she hears it. A voice. Weak. Barely there. "Judy, help me, Daniela." Judy's eyes fill with tears instantly. "Daniela?" She steps closer, hand trembling as it reaches for the knob. "I'm here. It's okay." Her fingers wrap around the handle. Pause. Something feels wrong. Cold. Too cold. But it's Daniela. It has to be. She opens the door. Inside? Darkness. No Daniela. Just a hanging dress, slowly swaying. And behind it, two glowing eyes snap open. Judy screams. Judy's scream tears through the room, raw and sharp, as she stumbles backward, crashing into the wall. Those eyes, burning, inhuman, don't blink. They just stare, watching her, learning her. The dress sways gently, as if something behind it is breathing. Slowly, patiently, slowly, patiently. Judy can't move. Her legs won't listen. Her mind is screaming. Run, but her body is frozen in place, trapped in that moment where fear becomes something physical. Then the closet slams shut. Hard. The sound explodes in the silence, snapping Judy out of it. She gasps, sucking in air like she's been underwater too long, and bolts for the door. She doesn't look back. She can't. Because something tells her, if she does, it'll be right there. Inches away. In the hallway, Daniela is running again. Barefoot. Panicked. Her flashlight long gone. The darkness swallows everything except the sound of her breathing and the pounding of her feet against the floor. "Mary Ellen!" she screams, voice cracking apart. Judy. But the house twists her voice, stretches it, throws it back at her from the walls in broken echoes. "Judy," she stops. That wasn't her. Slowly, she turns. At the end of the hallway stands a figure, tall, still, wearing black. A veil covers its face, but Daniela feels its eyes on her, cold, empty, ancient. The air around it feels heavy, like gravity itself has thickened. Daniela's breath catches. Her mind refuses to process what she's seeing because it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't exist. The ferryman. It doesn't move. But it doesn't need to. Daniela stumbles back, shaking her head, whispering, "No, no," like she can undo it just by refusing to believe. But the moment her foot slides against the floor, it's closer. No footsteps, no sound, just closer. Daniela screams and runs. Down the stairs, nearly slipping, grabbing the railing to keep from falling as panic completely takes over. She crashes into the living room, eyes wild, chest heaving, and freezes. Mary Ellen stands in the middle of the room. Still. Facing away. "Mary Ellen," Daniela whispers, relief flooding in so fast it almost knocks her over. "Oh my God, thank." Mary Ellen slowly turns. Her face is wrong, not twisted, not monstrous, just empty, eyes unfocused, like she's not fully there. "Daniela?" she says softly, too softly. Daniela hesitates. Something about this feels off. "Are you okay?" she asks, stepping closer, cautious now. Mary Ellen smiles. But it's not her smile. Behind Daniela, a chair scrapes loudly across the floor. Behind Daniela, a chair scrapes loudly across the floor. Daniela spins around, but nothing's there when she turns back. Mary Ellen is inches from her face. Daniela screams, stumbling backward, falling hard onto the floor. "Stop!" she cries, scrambling away. "Stop, please!" And just like that, Mary Ellen collapses. Her body drops lifelessly to the ground. "Mary Ellen?" Daniela rushes forward, shaking her. "Mary Ellen, wake up!" Panic floods her voice as she checks her face, her breathing. She's alive. Barely. But something is wrong. Something is inside this house that can reach into people and pull them out of themselves. From the hallway, a slow clap echoes. Daniela looks up. No one there, but the sound continues. Clap, 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 mocking, watching, waiting, waiting, waiting. And somewhere deep inside the house, something has decided they're not leaving. Not tonight. The clapping stops, instantly. Like whatever was enjoying the moment has seen enough, for now. Daniela's breath comes in broken gasps as she kneels beside Mary Ellen, shaking her shoulders gently at first, then harder. "Wake up! Please, wake up!" her voice cracks, desperation spilling through every word. Mary Ellen doesn't respond. Her head lolls slightly, eyes closed, chest rising just enough to prove she's still alive. But she's not here. Not really. And that's worse. Because it means something else is. Upstairs, Judy is running again. Tears blur her vision as she stumbles through the hallway, every shadow now feeling alive, every doorway a threat. "Mom, Dad," she whispers between breaths, knowing they're not here, knowing no one is coming. The house feels bigger now. Twisted, like it's stretching around them, feeding on their fear. Then, a door creaks open behind her. Judy stops, slowly turns. The artifact room. The door is open, wide. "No," she breathes, shaking her head. That door should never be open. Never! Her mother's warning echoes in her mind, sharp and urgent. Stay out. But it's too late for that. It's already out. Whatever was trapped in there, it's everywhere now. And something inside that room moves. Judy steps back, but a force pulls her attention forward again. Not physical. Something deeper, like a whisper inside her own thoughts. Come closer. She doesn't want to, but she does. Step by step, Judy moves toward the room, her fear now mixed with something else, something heavy and suffocating, like sadness that doesn't belong to her. The air grows colder with every inch. Her breath becomes visible. The lights flicker. Inside, the room is chaos. Glass cases open, objects scattered, shadows shifting where nothing should move. And at the center, Annabelle, sitting calmly. Waiting. Judy's chest tightens. "No," she whispers again, barely audible. "That doll shouldn't be out. That doll is the reason all of this is happening. She knows it. She feels it." Behind her, a voice, soft, gentle. Judy, her eyes widen. She knows that voice. Slowly, painfully, she turns. Her father stands in the doorway. Ed Warren. Relief hits her like a wave so strong it almost drops her to her knees. "Dad," she breathes, tears spilling instantly. "You're back. You're here," he smiles. Warm, familiar, safe. "Come here," he says, holding out his arms. Judy steps forward without thinking. Of course she does. That's her father. That's safety. That's everything she's been holding on to in this nightmare. She runs toward him, then stops, just inches away. Something is wrong. His eyes. They don't blink. Not once. Her breath catches. Her body freezes mid-step. "Dad?" she whispers, doubt creeping in. The smile stays, unchanging, too perfect. "Come here, Judy," he repeats, voice slightly off, like it's being played through something instead of coming from him. Judy slowly steps back. "No." The word barely escapes her lips, but it's enough. The thing in front of her twitches, just slightly. The smile stretches wider, too wide, and then its head snaps sideways with a sickening crack. Judy screams. The figure lunges forward, but something slams between them, a force, invisible, violent. The creature is thrown back into the room, crashing into the shelves as objects rattle and fall around it. Judy collapses to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. Behind her, a new voice. Strong, commanding. "Get away from her, Lorraine." Judy looks up, tears streaming down her face as her mother rushes toward her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Mom!" she sobs, clinging to her. Lorraine holds her close, eyes scanning the room, fear and fury burning together. "It's okay, I'm here," she whispers, but her voice carries something else. Urgency, because this isn't over, not even close. Behind them, Annabelle tilts her head. For a moment, everything is still. Too still. Lorraine holds Judy tightly, one hand pressed against the back of her head, shielding her, grounding her, whispering prayers under her breath so fast they almost blur together. Judy clings to her, shaking, her fingers gripping her mother's coat, like if she lets go, she'll be swallowed by the house itself. The air is thick, heavy with something unseen, something watching, and then a crash. From downstairs. "Ed." Lorraine's eyes snap toward the hallway. "Stay with me," she whispers firmly, pulling Judy up with her. No hesitation, no fear slowing her now, just purpose. They move together, fast but careful, stepping out of the artifact room as the door behind them creaks, then slowly begins to close on its own. Click. Locked. Downstairs, the living room is chaos. Chairs overturned. Lamps shattered. The TV flickering violently between static and darkness. And in the center, Ed Warren stands, gripping a crucifix tightly in his hand, his voice steady but strained as he recites a blessing. In front of him, Daniela is on the floor, screaming, her body twisting unnaturally as if something inside her is fighting to stay. "Hold on," Ed shouts, stepping closer, his voice rising with force. "You have no power here." Daniela's head snaps toward him. Her voice changes. Deep, layered. Not hers. She opened the door. The words crawl out slowly, each one heavier than the last. Lorraine rushes in, pulling Judy back as she takes in the scene instantly. "It's not just one," she says, her voice sharp with realization. "They followed her. All of them." The room seems to react to that. Lights flicker violently. The walls groan. Something scratches from inside them. Ed tightens his grip. "We close it," he says. "Now." Lorraine nods, understanding immediately. This was never about fighting them, not one by one. That would take forever. This is about the source. The door that was opened. Annabelle. Judy's eyes widen. "The doll," she whispers. Lorraine looks at her, firm but gentle. "We have to put her back." But as those words leave her mouth, Daniela's body lifts. Off the ground. Her back arches violently as something unseen hoists her upward, her scream cutting through the house like glass. "You're too late!" The voice inside her snarls, echoing from everywhere at once. Ed steps forward. "No," he says, stronger now. "We're not." Lorraine grabs Judy's hand. "Stay behind me," she says, then moves, fast, toward the artifact room. The hallway stretches before them, darker than it should be, the air colder with every step. Shadows shift along the walls, reaching, whispering, trying to slow them down. Judy squeezes her mother's hand, her heart pounding, but she doesn't stop. They reach the door. Locked. Lorraine places her hand against it, closing her eyes for just a second. Then she begins to pray. Soft at first, then louder. The lock rattles. The door trembles. Something inside pushes back, but Lorraine doesn't stop. "Open," she commands, and suddenly, the door bursts open. Inside, the room is worse than before. Objects shaking, glass cracking. The air itself vibrating like it's about to tear apart. And at the center, Annabelle sits on the floor, waiting. Lorraine steps forward slowly, every instinct screaming at her to stop. But she doesn't. Judy stays close behind, trembling but brave, her eyes locked on the doll. "Don't listen," Lorraine whispers, "no matter what you hear, because already the voices begin, soft, familiar." "Mom." Judy's breath catches. It sounds like her. Another voice follows. Lorraine's voice. "Judy, help me!" Judy squeezes her eyes shut. "It's not real, it's not real," she whispers, forcing herself forward. Lorraine reaches the doll, kneels. Her hands hover over it for just a second. Then she grabs it. The moment she touches Annabelle, everything explodes. The house roars. A violent force slams into them, knocking Judy back as Lorraine struggles to hold on to the doll, her face tightening with effort. The voices scream now, overlapping, furious, desperate. "No, you can't! She's ours!" Lorraine stands, gripping Annabelle tightly, fighting through the pressure crushing around her. "Not anymore," she shouts. They reach the case. The glass door swings open. Judy scrambles up, rushing to help, her hand shaking as she holds it steady. Lorraine places the doll inside and slams it shut. Silence. Instant. Total. The air clears. The house exhales. Downstairs, Daniela collapses back to the floor, her body finally still. Ed lowers his hands slowly, breathing hard, the tension draining from his face as the presence disappears. Upstairs, Judy stares at the case. At Annabelle, back where she belongs, still. Smiling. Like nothing ever happened. But Lorraine doesn't move. She keeps staring at the doll, her expression unreadable. Because deep down, she knows something the others don't. This wasn't the end. Just a warning. Gary Dauberman had already spent years orbiting the Warren universe before he ever sat in the director's chair. And that matters when you watch Annabelle Comes Home. He wasn't a random hire stepping into a profitable horror machine. He was one of the chief architects of its nightmare grammar. The writer behind Annabelle, Creation, and The Nun. A screenwriter who clearly understood that this franchise works best when the supernatural feels less like spectacle and more like contamination. By 2019, This was his directing debut, which could have made the film feel cautious or over-designed. Instead, it feels personal in a very specific way, like a longtime student finally getting to rearrange the haunted house himself. What makes Doberman's leap to director interesting is that he doesn't treat the movie as a spin-off desperate to justify its own existence. He treats it like a pressure cooker. Rather than sending Annabelle into another origin story or another distant location, he traps the danger inside the Warrens' artifact room and lets the whole premise tighten from there. Smart move. Really smart. Horror franchises often get bigger when they run out of ideas. Doberman goes smaller, more contained, more intimate. The result plays less like a mythology expansion and more like a cursed home invasion film, where every object on a shelf feels like a loaded weapon waiting for permission to fire. And that creative choice tells you everything about his directorial instincts. James Wan, who helped shape the entire Conjuring brand, always understood that fear lands hardest when the frame feels organized but spiritually unstable. Doberman borrows that lesson without just doing a Wan imitation. His camera doesn't scream for attention, his staging does the work. Doors stay in frame a second too long, hallways breathe, bedrooms stop feeling safe. He builds dread through spatial awareness, which is exactly what this story needs because the house itself becomes the movie's central mechanism, not just the setting. The mechanism. Every room contains the possibility of release, and every release feels like a consequence of curiosity. That's also why the decision to center Judy Warren gives the film its emotional spine. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson are still vital as Ed and Lorraine, but Doberman knows the more revealing angle is to view this occult empire through the eyes of a child living in its shadow. That's the hook beneath the hook. What does it mean to grow up in a house where evil is cataloged like family heirlooms? What kind of normal childhood can survive when your parents are professional gatekeepers between the living and the damned? Annabelle Comes Home doesn't become a full psychological character study, but Doberman's vision clearly pushes toward that tension. Judy isn't just another kid in danger, she's the inheritor of a legacy she never asked for. There's a playful side to his horror instincts too, and the film benefits from it. Doberman understands that a museum of cursed objects is basically a horror director's toy chest. The Ferryman, the samurai armor, the wedding dress, the monkey with the symbols. These aren't just creepy props tossed in for franchise texture. They reveal a filmmaker interested in modular fear. The idea that one demonic catalyst can wake up multiple nightmares and let the movie shift tones without breaking itself. One scene leans ghost story, another leans monster movie, another edges toward supernatural chase thriller. That variety keeps the film from becoming visually or emotionally flat, especially in a series that could easily start repeating its own rhythms. But here's the catch. Doberman's biggest strength is also where the film feels most revealing as a debut. He's more confident with orchestration than profundity. He knows how to engineer tension, how to escalate threats, how to make a room feel hostile. He's less interested in the heavier spiritual melancholy that gives the best Conjuring films their strange elegance. James Wan often makes terror feel tragic, as though evil leaves a bruise on faith itself. Doberman's version is more mechanical, more ride-like, more delighted by setup and payoff. That isn't a flaw, exactly. It's a fingerprint. Annabelle Comes Home works because it accepts the pleasures of the haunted object sandbox and executes them with discipline rather than pretending to be something grander. The studio backing helped make that possible. New Line Cinema and Atomic Monster had already built a reliable formula around this universe, but formula alone doesn't keep a franchise alive. Audiences can smell autopilot. Doberman's direction gives the film a sense of authorship, even within the machinery of shared universe horror. You feel a filmmaker trying to prove he can do more than write scare beats on a page. He wants control of atmosphere, rhythm, and visual storytelling. And for a first-time feature director, that ambition comes through clearly. He doesn't overreach into self-conscious prestige. He locks into what the film is, then sharpens it. That may be the best way to understand Annabelle Comes Home, not as the boldest entry in the franchise, but as a revealing one. It shows what happens when a writer steeped in a horror mythology finally gets to direct within it. The movie becomes a kind of creative handoff still connected to the Wan blueprint, still supported by studio franchise logic, but stamped with Doberman's preference for containment, escalation, and fear through accumulation. The doll is only the doorway. The room is the real monster. And once that vision clicks, the rest of the film starts making perfect sense. Because a director's vision can shape the architecture of fear, but the real blueprint begins earlier than the camera inside the script, where all those cursed objects, character dynamics, and escalating hauntings had to be arranged with precision before a single light was switched on. If Annabelle Comes Home feels tightly wound, almost like every scare is placed with deliberate intent, that's because Gary Dauberman wasn't just directing this story, he wrote it. And when a writer directs their own script, something shifts. There's less translation loss between idea and execution. What's on the page is already designed to function visually, spatially, rhythmically. You can feel that cohesion here, especially in how the film builds its central premise, like a chain reaction rather than a traditional narrative climb. This isn't an adaptation. It's an original screenplay built inside an established universe, which comes with both freedom and constraint. Freedom, because Dauberman isn't bound to a novel or true story. Constraint, because the rules of the Conjuring Universe already exist. Artifacts, demonic logic, the Warrens' role as spiritual gatekeepers. So the writing challenge becomes, how do you create something new without breaking what audiences already understand? Dauberman's answer is elegant in its simplicity. Don't expand outward. Collapse inward. Take everything that's been built across multiple films and compress it into one house, one night, one escalating disaster. And here's where the script shows real structural intelligence. The story operates like a domino setup. The opening act doesn't just introduce characters, it establishes rules. The artifact room isn't just creepy decor, it's a system of containment. Locked cases, blessed objects, strict warnings. You already know what's going to happen the moment those rules are explained. Someone will break them. That inevitability becomes the engine of tension. The audience isn't waiting for chaos, they're anticipating the exact moment it begins. And when it does, it doesn't arrive all at once. It spreads. Think about how the film handles escalation. Annabelle herself isn't the endgame threat. She's the key. That's a crucial writing decision. Instead of centering the entire narrative around one entity, the script turns her into a catalyst that awakens everything else. Suddenly, the film isn't about surviving one haunting. It's about navigating a house where multiple supernatural forces are active at once, each with its own rules, rhythms, and methods of attack. That layered danger keeps the tension from plateauing. Just when one threat subsides, another emerges, often from a completely different tonal angle. And yet, the script never loses clarity. That's harder than it sounds. With so many entities in play, the film could easily become chaotic in a way that confuses rather than scares. But Dauberman keeps the narrative anchored through character perspective, especially Judy. We experience the unfolding horror largely through her understanding of the artifact room's rules and her growing realization that those rules are being violated. That perspective grounds the supernatural chaos in something emotionally readable. Fear isn't abstract. It's tied to a child watching her world's safety net unravel piece by piece. There's also a clever balance in how the dialogue functions. This isn't a script overloaded with exposition, even though it easily could have been given the mythology involved. Instead, Dauberman leans into implication. Characters don't explain every object or every spirit. They react to them. They fear them. They try to survive them. And that restraint works in the film's favor because it keeps the audience slightly off balance. You're not given a full rulebook for every threat, which means uncertainty becomes part of the experience. And in horror, uncertainty is oxygen. At the same time, the script isn't trying to reinvent narrative structure. This is still a three-act progression, just compressed and intensified. Setup, breach, consequence. The second act, where the house fully turns against its occupants, functions almost like a series of interconnected short horror films, each built around a different artifact or entity. That modular structure could feel disjointed, but here it's unified by cause and effect. Every scare traces back to the same original mistake: curiosity. That through line gives the chaos a kind of moral symmetry. But here's where things get interesting. The script isn't just about fear, it's about responsibility. Judy represents inherited burden. Daniela represents reckless curiosity driven by grief. Mary Ellen sits somewhere in between, trying to maintain control but constantly reacting rather than leading. These aren't just archetypes thrown into a haunted house. They're different responses to the unknown, and the script quietly plays with that contrast. Who respects the rules? Who challenges them? Who pays the price? Horror becomes less about punishment and more about consequence. Still, the screenplay doesn't dig as deep into those emotional threads as it could have. You can feel the potential for something heavier, especially with Daniela's motivations, but the film chooses momentum over introspection. Scenes move quickly. Threats escalate efficiently. The pacing rarely allows for extended emotional excavation, and that's a deliberate trade-off. Doberman prioritizes tension over thematic density. Whether that works depends on what you want from the film. As a horror engine, it's precise. As a character study, it hints more than it explores. And maybe that's the most telling thing about the script. It knows exactly what it is. It's not chasing prestige horror or philosophical weight. It's building a controlled environment where cause leads to effect, mistake leads to escalation, and fear compounds rather than resets. Every narrative decision feeds that machine. Every character choice either stabilizes or destabilizes it. And by the time the story reaches its climax, you're not watching random hauntings. You're watching a system collapse under pressure. Because once the blueprint is locked in, the next question becomes even more fascinating. Who do you trust to bring those characters to life? Who embodies fear, curiosity, control, and who almost stepped into those roles before the final cast was set? Casting a horror film like Annabelle Comes Home isn't about finding the biggest stars. It's about finding faces the audience believes in before the darkness arrives. Because horror works on trust. You have to care about the people in danger, or the danger itself feels hollow. And Gary Doberman, stepping into his first directing role, understood that instinctively. He didn't chase marquee names. He built a cast that feels grounded, almost deceptively ordinary. So when the supernatural chaos begins, it feels like it's invading something real rather than staged. At the center of that casting philosophy is McKenna Grace as Judy Warren, and this is where the film quietly makes one of its smartest decisions. Grace isn't playing a typical horror movie child. There's no exaggerated innocence, no forced vulnerability. Instead, she brings a kind of emotional intelligence that makes Judy feel like she's already lived with fear long before this particular night begins. Watch her in the early scenes. There's a stillness there, a watchfulness. She doesn't overreact. She absorbs. That restraint becomes crucial later, because when she does show fear, it lands harder. And here's what makes her casting even more interesting. Grace had already built a reputation for handling emotionally complex roles in projects like Gifted and The Haunting of Hill House. That background matters. It means she understands how to play internal conflict without external noise. Judy isn't just scared of ghosts. She's navigating what it means to be the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren. That identity sits on her shoulders in subtle ways, and Grace carries it without ever turning the character into exposition. Then there's Madison Iseman as Mary Ellen, the babysitter. On paper, this role could have easily slipped into cliché, the responsible teenager trying to hold things together. But Iseman plays her with a grounded sincerity that keeps the character from feeling generic. She's not fearless. She's not reckless. She's someone trying to do the right thing in a situation that keeps shifting beyond her control. That balance is harder than it looks. Too passive, and the character disappears. Too aggressive, and it feels artificial. Iseman threads that line well, making Mary Ellen the film's emotional stabilizer when everything else spirals. And then the wild card, Katie Serif as Daniela. This is the most volatile character in the film, and the casting reflects that. Daniela isn't just curious. She's driven by grief, by guilt, by a need to reach beyond the boundaries she's been warned not to cross. Serife plays her with an edge that never fully settles. You're never entirely comfortable with her choices, and that discomfort is intentional. She's the narrative catalyst, the one who breaks the system, and the performance leans into that instability without turning her into a villain. She's not malicious. She's desperate. That distinction matters. What's fascinating is how these three performances are designed to contrast rather than overlap. Judy represents inherited knowledge and caution. Mary Ellen represents responsibility and control. Daniela represents emotional impulse and transgression. That triangle creates a dynamic where each character responds differently to the same escalating horror. And because the casting emphasizes those differences, The interactions feel organic rather than scripted. When they argue, it doesn't feel like dialogue. It feels like three distinct worldviews colliding under pressure. Of course, the film still anchors itself with Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga returning as Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their presence is brief but essential. They're not just cameos, they're tonal anchors. The moment they appear, the film reconnects to the larger Conjuring Universe, and both actors bring a kind of quiet authority that reinforces the mythology without needing to explain it. Wilson's grounded warmth and Farmiga's intuitive intensity remind you that this world has rules, history, and weight beyond what we see in this single story. But here's the subtle brilliance of how they're used. They leave early. That's not just a plot convenience, it's a casting strategy. By removing the franchise's most experienced paranormal investigators, the film forces the younger cast to carry the narrative without a safety net. It shifts the dynamic from controlled investigation to uncontrolled survival. And suddenly, the actors we've been introduced to aren't just supporting players, they're the entire emotional core. There's also an absence worth mentioning: no stunt casting, no distracting celebrity cameos designed to pull attention away from the story. That restraint keeps the immersion intact. You're not watching actors you recognize solving problems. You're watching characters who feel unequipped, unprepared, and increasingly overwhelmed. And in horror, that vulnerability is everything. Still, casting is only half the equation. An actor can be perfectly chosen and still feel disconnected if the performance doesn't align with the film's emotional rhythm. That's where things get deeper, because once these actors step into their roles, the real question isn't who they are. It's how they transform those characters moment by moment, scene by scene, into something that feels lived in, reactive, and frighteningly real. And that's where the film either fully comes alive or reveals its limitations. The moment Annabelle Comes Home fully locks in isn't during a jump scare. It's in the quiet tension of a child realizing the rules that protect her are failing. And that's where McKenna Grace does something far more interesting than most horror leads. She internalizes fear before expressing it. Watch her closely in the early stretch of the film. Judy doesn't panic. She studies. Her performance is built on observation, not reaction. That choice gives the entire film a different emotional frequency, because when fear finally breaks through, it feels earned rather than manufactured. Her character arc isn't about bravery in the traditional sense, it's about acceptance. Judy already knows the world is dangerous. Her parents made sure of that. What changes is her relationship to that danger. Early on, she exists in a kind of controlled awareness, trusting the systems her parents built. But as those systems collapse, her performance shifts subtly. Her posture tightens, her voice lowers. She stops looking to others for reassurance and starts making decisions. Grace never overplays this transformation. It happens in increments, almost invisibly, until you realize she's no longer the protected child. She's actively resisting the chaos. And then there's Katie Sarif, whose performance operates on the opposite frequency. Where Grace is controlled, Sarif is volatile. Daniela is a character driven by unresolved grief, and Sarif leans into that instability without turning it into melodrama. Her choices feel impulsive but never random. Every risky decision traces back to emotional need. That's what makes her performance compelling. She doesn't act like someone in a horror movie. She acts like someone who would make the wrong choice because the right one offers no comfort. There's a particular tension in how Sarif uses stillness. Daniela isn't constantly frantic. In fact, some of her most unsettling moments come when she's calm, too calm, standing in front of the artifact room, staring at objects she's been told not to touch. You can feel the pull of curiosity battling with fear, and curiosity keeps winning. That internal conflict becomes the trigger for everything that follows. Without her performance grounding that motivation, the entire plot risks feeling mechanical. Instead, it feels inevitable. She doesn't just start the chaos, she believes she has to. Between those two extremes sits Madison Iseman, and her performance might be the most deceptively difficult of the three. Mary Ellen isn't driven by trauma or legacy, she's driven by responsibility. That sounds simple. It's not. Playing the grounded character in a horror film often means fading into the background, reacting rather than shaping events. But Iseman avoids that trap by giving Mary Ellen a quiet authority. She doesn't dominate scenes, but she stabilizes them. When others spiral, she recalibrates. What makes her work effective is restraint. She doesn't try to compete with the more dramatic arcs around her. Instead, she anchors the emotional logic of the film. When she's scared, it feels like a rational response. When she takes charge, it feels necessary, not performative. That balance keeps the film from tipping into chaos too early. She's the human baseline, the character who reacts the way we imagine we would. And when even she starts losing control, the escalation feels real. The chemistry between these three performances is where the film finds its rhythm. Not through dialogue, but through contrast. Grace pulls inward. Sarif pushes outward. Iceman holds the center. That triangle creates a constant push and pull dynamic where no single emotional tone dominates for too long. One character grounds a scene, another destabilizes it, the third absorbs the impact. It's a subtle interplay, but it's what keeps the film from feeling repetitive even as it cycles through multiple hauntings. Now, step back for a second. Compare this to something like The Conjuring, where Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson carry the emotional weight through experience and authority. Those performances feel like control confronting chaos. Here, it's the opposite. These characters don't have answers. They don't have tools. They're improvising survival. That shift changes how performances function. It's less about commanding the screen and more about reacting truthfully within it. And that's why the film's most effective moments aren't its loudest ones. They're the pauses, the hesitation before opening a door, the glance between characters when something feels wrong but hasn't revealed itself yet, the silence where no one wants to say what they're thinking because saying it makes it real. These actors understand that fear isn't just about what you see, it's about what you anticipate. And they play that anticipation with surprising control. Still, there's a ceiling to how far the performances can go, and it comes from the script's priorities. The film is constantly moving, constantly escalating, which means the actors rarely get extended space to explore deeper emotional layers. You catch glimpses. Daniela's guilt, Judy's inherited burden, but the film doesn't linger long enough to fully excavate them. That's not a failure of performance, it's a structural choice. Momentum over introspection. Even so, what these actors accomplish within those constraints is impressive. They don't just react to scares, they shape how those scares land. Their fear feels specific, not generic. Their decisions feel motivated, not convenient. And in a horror film built around objects and entities, they ensure the human element never disappears beneath the supernatural noise. Because once performances lock the emotional core in place, the next layer becomes something you can't ignore. The physical world itself. The house. The objects. The textures of fear built into every corner of the frame. And that's where the film starts speaking a completely different language. If horror lives or dies on atmosphere, then Annabelle Comes Home survives, and often thrives, on the strength of its physical world. This is a film where production design isn't just background decoration, it's the engine of fear itself. Every object, every room, every shadowed corner is doing narrative work. And that starts with the Warrens' artifact room, which might be one of the most conceptually rich spaces in modern horror. A museum of evil disguised as a basement. The genius of this space lies in its organization. Everything is cataloged, contained, labeled. Glass cases, holy symbols, locks. It feels controlled, almost clinical. But that order creates a false sense of safety, because the moment that order breaks, the entire room transforms from archive to arsenal. That's the core design philosophy at work here. Containment equals tension. You're not just looking at creepy objects, you're looking at restrained threats. And restraint is always more unsettling than chaos. Production designer Jennifer Spence approaches this world with obsessive detail. Nothing feels randomly placed. The artifacts aren't just visually distinct, they suggest histories. You look at the samurai armor, the wedding dress, the Ferryman coins, and you don't just see props. You imagine stories, tragedies, rituals. That layered design gives the film a kind of narrative density without needing exposition. The environment tells you things the script doesn't have to, and that's where the film becomes immersive rather than explanatory. Color plays a quiet but crucial role here. The house isn't drenched in exaggerated horror tones. Instead, it leans into warm, lived-in hues, browns, yellows, soft shadows that make the space feel safe at first glance. That familiarity is intentional. It lowers your guard. Then, as the night unfolds, lighting shifts subtly. Shadows deepen, corners darken, warmth drains out of the frame. The same rooms start feeling hostile without physically changing. That transition is where design and cinematography begin to overlap, blurring the line between what's built and what's lit. And then there's the Annabelle doll herself, a masterclass in restrained visual horror. What makes Annabelle effective isn't movement, it's presence. She rarely does anything. She doesn't need to. Her design is built around stillness. The cracked porcelain skin, the fixed smile, the lifeless eyes that somehow feel aware. She sits, she watches, and the longer the camera holds on her, the more uncomfortable you become. That's design doing psychological work. The doll isn't terrifying because of what she does. It's terrifying because of what you imagine she could do. Costume design follows a similar philosophy of subtle storytelling. Judy's clothing reflects innocence, but not fragility. Simple, grounded, practical. Mary Ellen's wardrobe leans into normalcy, reinforcing her role as the film's emotional anchor. Daniela's look carries a slightly more restless energy, hinting at her internal instability. These aren't flashy choices, but they reinforce character identity visually, which matters in a film where dialogue often takes a backseat to atmosphere. What's particularly effective is how the house evolves as a character. Early on, it feels like a home-structured, safe, familiar. By the midpoint, it becomes fragmented. Rooms feel disconnected. Hallways stretch longer than they should. The same space begins to behave unpredictably. Doors open into danger instead of safety. That transformation isn't achieved through massive set changes, it's achieved through how the space is used. Blocking, lighting, and object placement shift just enough to make the familiar feel unreliable. And here's the deeper layer. The production design reflects the film's central theme: control versus chaos. The Warrens built this house to contain evil. Every object is a reminder of something that's been captured, neutralized, or at least restrained. But the moment those boundaries are broken, the design flips. The same objects that symbolize control now represent vulnerability. The house doesn't just contain horror, it becomes the source of it. Still, the film doesn't push its design into full symbolic territory the way some prestige horror might. It hints at deeper meanings: grief, curiosity, inherited fear. But it doesn't fully abstract them into visual metaphor. Instead, it stays grounded in functional horror. Every design choice serves the immediate goal: build tension, sustain atmosphere, deliver fear. That focus keeps the film accessible, even if it limits how far the visual language could have gone thematically. But what's undeniable is how cohesive the craftsmanship feels. Nothing clashes, nothing distracts. The world is unified in tone and purpose. You believe in this house. You believe these objects could exist within it. And once that belief locks in, the film gains power. Because horror doesn't need to convince you something is real, it just needs you to stop questioning it. And once the physical world is fully realized, the next layer takes over: the way it's captured. The camera doesn't just observe this space. It navigates it, manipulates it, turns it into something fluid and unpredictable. And that's where the film's visual storytelling truly begins to breathe. What the production design builds, the camera weaponizes. Because in Annabelle Comes Home, cinematography isn't just about capturing images, it's about controlling what you're allowed to see, and more importantly, what you're not. That tension between visibility and obscurity becomes the film's most consistent visual strategy, and it's where Michael Burgess, the film's cinematographer, quietly shapes the entire experience. Burgess doesn't flood scenes with light to show off detail, he withholds it. Practical lighting lamps, night lights, soft household sources becomes the primary illumination, which means shadows aren't just present, they dominate. And here's where the technique gets interesting. Shadows in this film don't just hide things, they suggest them. A corner isn't empty, it's unresolved. Your eye keeps drifting back, trying to confirm what may or may not be there. That uncertainty creates a low-level tension that never fully releases. The camera placement reinforces that unease. Instead of constantly pushing in for emphasis, the film often holds wider frames than you'd expect. Characters occupy only part of the screen, leaving negative space around them. Doorways, hallways, empty rooms. And that space feels active. It's not background, it's potential. You're not just watching the character, you're scanning everything around them, anticipating intrusion. That's a classic horror technique, but here it's executed with discipline. The film trusts the audience to look. And then, when the camera does move, it moves with purpose. slow tracking shots, gentle pushes, nothing frantic unless the scene demands it. This restraint matters because it keeps the film from exhausting its own tension. If everything is loud, nothing is. Instead, Burgess builds a visual rhythm, stillness, movement, stillness again. That rhythm mirrors the film's pacing, where quiet dread gives way to sudden escalation, then settles back into uneasy calm. Focus plays a subtle but powerful role too. Depth of field is often shallow, meaning only part of the frame is sharp while the rest falls into blur. That selective clarity forces your attention, but it also limits your awareness. You can't fully trust what's outside that focus. Something could be there, or not. The film doesn't confirm. It lets your imagination do the work. And in horror, imagination is always more effective than explicit reveal. One of the most effective visual strategies is how the film uses thresholds, doors, windows, mirrors, spaces that separate one environment from another. The camera lingers on these boundaries, framing them as points of transition. Safe space versus unsafe space, known versus unknown. And as the film progresses, those boundaries start to collapse. Doors don't protect, mirrors don't reflect truth. The visual language reinforces the idea that separation itself is breaking down. Color temperature shifts almost invisibly across the film. Early scenes lean warmer, more inviting. As the night deepens, cooler tones creep in. Blues, desaturated shadows, harsher contrast. It's not a dramatic switch. It's a gradual bleed. That transition mirrors the narrative descent, where comfort erodes slowly rather than disappearing all at once. You don't notice the shift immediately, you feel it. There's also a strong sense of spatial continuity. The camera helps you understand the layout of the house early on, where rooms connect, where hallways lead. That clarity becomes crucial later, because when chaos begins, you're aware of how characters move through space. You understand when they're getting closer to danger or further from safety. Without that spatial grounding, the film would feel disorienting in the wrong way. Instead, it feels controlled, even when everything inside the frame isn't. Now compare this to more aggressive modern horror cinematography. Rapid cuts, handheld chaos, visual overload. Annabelle Comes Home resists that approach. It leans closer to classical horror language, where composition and timing carry more weight than constant motion. That choice aligns with the Conjuring Universe's identity, but it also reflects Doberman's directing instincts. He's not trying to reinvent visual storytelling. He's refining it within a specific tonal framework. Still, there are moments where the film could have pushed further. The visual style is consistent, sometimes to a fault. It rarely breaks its own rules, and while that consistency creates cohesion, it can also limit surprise. Imagine if certain sequences had radically shifted visual language, distorted lenses, more aggressive camera movement, something that visually signaled a deeper rupture. The film hints at that possibility but ultimately stays within its established boundaries. Even so, what's here works. The cinematography doesn't compete with the story, it supports it. It builds tension without announcing itself. It guides your eye without forcing it. And most importantly, it understands that horror isn't about what you show. It's about what you let linger just outside the frame. Because once the visuals have done their job, something else takes over, something you don't see but absolutely feel. The sound, the silence, the way a single note or the absence of it can turn a quiet room into something unbearable. And that's where the film's atmosphere reaches its most invisible and most powerful form. Sound is where Annabelle Comes Home stops being a haunted house movie and starts becoming an experience that crawls under your skin. Because what you hear or don't hear controls how you feel long before anything visually confirms your fear. And composer Joseph Bishara understands this better than most working in modern horror. He doesn't write music you hum, he writes sound you endure. Bishara's approach to scoring isn't about melody, it's about texture. The music doesn't guide you emotionally in a traditional sense. It destabilizes you. Low-frequency rumbles sit beneath scenes like something alive and breathing. High-pitched strings scrape rather than sing. Notes bend, stretch, dissolve. You're not listening to a composition, you're listening to tension taking shape. And that choice aligns perfectly with the film's design philosophy. Nothing is fully stable, not even the sound. What's fascinating is how often the score pulls back instead of pushing forward. Silence becomes a weapon. Not empty silence. Charged silence. The kind where every small noise feels amplified. A floorboard creak, a distant thud, the faintest whisper of movement. These sounds aren't just background, they're signals. And your brain starts searching for patterns, trying to predict what comes next. That anticipation is where the fear lives. Not in the jump scare itself, but in the seconds before it. And when the film does deploy a jump scare, the sound design is doing as much work as the visuals, sometimes more. It's not just about volume, it's about timing and contrast. A quiet scene stretches just long enough for you to settle, and then the audio snaps. Sharp, sudden, invasive. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. That's not accidental. That's precision. The film understands that fear is physical as much as psychological. There's also a clever layering happening between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. That is, sound that exists within the world of the film versus sound added for the audience. The line between the two blurs constantly. A music cue might begin as score but feel like it's coming from somewhere in the house. A noise within the environment might carry the emotional weight of a musical sting. That ambiguity keeps you off balance. You're never entirely sure what the characters hear versus what you hear, and that disconnect adds another layer of unease. Take the Ferryman sequence, for example. The sound of coins, water, distant movement. It's minimal, but it's loaded. Every auditory element feels isolated, exaggerated, almost unnatural. There's space between sounds, and that space becomes threatening. You're not overwhelmed, you're exposed. The absence of noise becomes as important as the presence of it. And in that absence, your imagination fills the gaps with something far worse than anything explicitly shown. The film also uses repetition in subtle ways. Certain sonic cues return, tones, textures, rhythmic patterns, but they're never identical. Slight variations keep them from becoming predictable. Instead, they feel like echoes, like something trying to communicate or re-emerge. That repetition builds a subconscious association. You hear a particular sound, and your body remembers what came with it before. Fear becomes conditioned. Still, the film doesn't aim for the kind of thematic musical identity you'd find in more orchestral horror scores. There's no sweeping leitmotif tied to Annabelle herself, no recurring melody that defines the film's emotional arc, and that's a deliberate choice. This isn't a story about a singular presence, it's about multiple forces awakening. A unified musical theme might actually work against that idea. Instead, the score fragments, just like the narrative threat. There are moments, though, where the sound design leans heavily into familiar horror rhythms. Build, silence, impact. Effective, yes, but also recognizable. You can feel the mechanics at work. And while that doesn't break immersion, it does remind you that the film is operating within a known framework. It's not reinventing horror sound, it's refining it. What elevates the audio landscape overall is how seamlessly it integrates with everything else. The production design gives the film texture, the cinematography controls what you see, the sound design controls how long you can sit with it. Together, they create a kind of sensory loop where each element reinforces the other. You see less, you hear more, you hear less, you imagine more, and that interplay keeps the tension alive even in moments where nothing overtly frightening is happening. Because horror isn't constant, it pulses, it recedes, it builds again. And sound is what carries that rhythm forward when visuals step back. But behind all of this, the performances, the design, the sound, there's a real-world process that shaped how it all came together. Tight schedules, creative decisions under pressure, unexpected challenges that forced adjustments. Because no film, especially one this controlled, comes together without a story behind the story. And that journey? It's where things get even more revealing. Every polished scare in Annabelle Comes Home hides a much messier reality behind it, the controlled chaos of production. Because while the film feels tightly engineered on screen, the process of building that precision is anything but smooth. This wasn't a globe-trotting shoot like some entries in the Conjuring Universe. It was something far more demanding in a different way, a contained production that had to keep reinventing the same physical space without ever making it feel repetitive. Most of the film was shot on sound stages, where the Warrens' house, and especially the artifact room, was meticulously constructed to allow maximum flexibility. That might sound like a limitation, but it's actually a creative advantage. Walls can be removed, ceilings adjusted, camera angles opened up. The same room can be lit, framed, and dressed differently to feel like an entirely new environment. That adaptability becomes crucial in a film where the setting doesn't change, but the emotional tone constantly does. And here's where Gary Dauberman's dual role as writer-director becomes particularly valuable. He isn't discovering the story during production. He's executing a plan he already understands intimately. That reduces friction. There's less guesswork on set, fewer moments where scenes need to be reinterpreted on the fly. But it also places more pressure on him. There's no buffer. If something doesn't work, the responsibility loops directly back to him. First-time directors often lean on collaborators to stabilize that pressure. Dauberman leans into preparation. Still, no amount of preparation eliminates the unpredictability of working with practical horror elements. Many of the film's effects rely on physical interaction, objects moving, environments shifting, actors reacting in real time. That means timing has to be exact. A door creaks open too early, the tension collapses. A prop doesn't move at the right speed, the illusion breaks. These are small details, but in horror, small details are everything. The difference between effective and forgettable often comes down to seconds. Working with younger actors adds another layer of complexity. McKenna Grace, Madison Iseman, and Katie Seraphe are carrying scenes that require sustained emotional intensity, often reacting to things that aren't physically present during filming. That demands imagination, but also trust. Trust in the director, in the crew, in the process. And by most accounts, the set environment leaned collaborative rather than authoritarian, which matters. Fear doesn't translate well when actors feel constrained. It needs space to breathe, even within tightly choreographed scenes. Then there are the happy accidents, those unpredictable moments that every production encounters and either fights or embraces. Horror, more than most genres, benefits from them. A shadow falls differently than expected. A sound echoes longer than planned. An actor reacts instinctively rather than sticking to the script. These moments can't be designed, but they can be recognized. And when they're captured, they often become some of the most effective elements in the final film. Controlled chaos, again, but this time behind the camera. Scheduling also plays a silent but significant role. Horror films, especially ones with heavy night sequences, often require shooting at odd hours to maintain consistency. That affects energy, focus, performance. Fatigue becomes a factor, and yet, the film rarely feels tired. That's a testament to how tightly the production was managed. Scenes feel deliberate, not rushed. Even the quieter moments carry intention, which suggests a shoot that, while demanding, stayed aligned with its creative goals. There's also the question of reshoots, an almost inevitable part of modern filmmaking. While not heavily publicized for this film, minor adjustments and pickups are standard practice, especially in horror where pacing and timing are everything. A scare that doesn't land in early cuts can be restructured. A sequence that feels too slow can be tightened. These aren't signs of failure, they're part of refinement. Editing and reshooting become extensions of storytelling rather than corrections. What's particularly interesting is how little of the production story feels chaotic in the traditional sense. No major on-set conflicts, no widely reported disasters, and that absence tells its own story. This wasn't a troubled production fighting to survive. It was a controlled one, built around a clear vision and executed with discipline. That stability often goes unnoticed because it doesn't generate headlines, but it shows up in the final product. Because when a film feels cohesive, it usually means the process behind it was aligned. Not perfect, never perfect, but focused. And once that process wraps, the film enters a completely different arena, one where creative intent meets audience reality. Numbers, expectations, success or disappointment measured not in atmosphere, but in box office returns. And that's where the conversation shifts again. The most surprising thing about Annabelle Comes Home isn't that it made money, it's how efficiently it did it. Because on paper, this isn't the flashiest entry in the Conjuring Universe. No massive set pieces, no globe-spanning narrative. Just a house, a handful of characters, and a collection of haunted objects. And yet, that restraint became its biggest financial advantage. Let's start with the numbers that matter. The film was produced on a relatively modest budget for a studio horror release, estimated around $27-32 million. That's crucial. In an era where blockbuster budgets regularly climb past $150 million, this kind of controlled spending changes the entire definition of success. The film doesn't need to dominate the global box office to be profitable. It just needs to perform consistently. And it did. Opening in late June 2019, the film pulled in roughly $20 million in its first 5 days domestically. It opened midweek, which spreads out the initial numbers but often boosts total opening performance. Not explosive, but solid. More importantly, it showed stability. Horror films often burn bright and fade fast. This one held its ground, benefiting from word of mouth and the built-in loyalty of the Conjuring fanbase. By the end of its theatrical run, Annabelle Comes Home had grossed over $230 million worldwide. Let that sink in. A film made for around $30 million crossing the $200 million mark isn't just a success. It's a textbook example of genre efficiency. Studios don't just look at raw totals, they look at return on investment. And by that metric, this film delivered exactly what it was designed to do. But here's where the context matters. Compared to other entries in the Conjuring universe, these numbers are slightly lower. The Nun crossed $360 million globally. The Conjuring 2 pushed past $320 million. Even Annabelle Creation reached higher totals. So, does that make Annabelle Comes Home a step down? Financially, yes, within the franchise hierarchy. But strategically, not at all. Because this film wasn't trying to outscale its predecessors, it was recalibrating. Smaller scope, lower budget, controlled risk. It's the kind of entry that keeps a franchise sustainable rather than overextended. Not every installment needs to be the biggest. Some need to be the most reliable. And that's exactly what this became. There's also the timing of its release to consider. Summer is crowded. Blockbusters dominate screens. Superhero films, action spectacles, animated giants. They compete for attention and premium formats. Dropping a contained horror film into that environment could have been risky, but horror operates differently. It doesn't need IMAX dominance. It thrives on contrast. While other films deliver spectacle, horror offers intensity, and audiences often want both. International markets played a major role as well. The Conjuring Universe has built a strong global following, particularly in regions where supernatural themes resonate culturally. That worldwide appeal helps stabilize performance even if domestic numbers aren't record-breaking. It's not just an American franchise, it's a global one. And Annabelle Comes Home benefited from that reach. Then there's the long tail, the part people often overlook. Home media, streaming, digital rentals. These revenue streams extend a film's life well beyond its theatrical window. Horror, especially, performs well here. It's rewatchable in a different way than other genres. People revisit it with friends, with lights off, for the experience. That repeat engagement adds value that doesn't always show up in opening weekend headlines. Merchandising, while not as massive as in superhero franchises, still contributes. The Annabelle doll itself has become an icon, recognizable, marketable, instantly tied to the brand. That kind of visual identity has long-term financial implications. It keeps the franchise present even between releases. What's interesting, though, is how the film's financial performance reflects its creative identity. It's not trying to redefine horror, it's refining a formula, and that consistency translates into audience trust. People know what they're getting, and they show up for it. In a landscape where unpredictability can hurt box office performance, reliability becomes a strength. Still, numbers only tell part of the story. A film can be profitable and still divisive. It can succeed financially while sparking debate critically. And that's where things get more complicated. Because once audiences and critics weigh in, the conversation shifts from, did it make money? To, did it matter? And that's a very different kind of judgment. Critics didn't tear Annabelle Comes Home apart, but they didn't fully embrace it either. And that middle ground is where things get interesting. Because this isn't a film that fails loudly. It divides quietly. On platforms like Rotten Tomatoes, it landed around the low 60% range, while Metacritic hovered in the mid-50s. Audience scores? More forgiving. CinemaScore gave it a respectable B+, which, for horror, is actually a strong signal. Fans walked out satisfied, even if critics remained measured. That split tells you everything about how the film functions. Critics often look for evolution, something that pushes the genre forward, redefines expectations, challenges structure. Annabelle Comes Home doesn't aim for that. It refines. It operates within a known framework and executes it with precision. For audiences invested in the Conjuring universe, that consistency feels like reliability. For critics, it can feel like repetition. Positive reviews tended to focus on the film's craftsmanship, the atmosphere, the production design, the way the artifact room becomes a playground of controlled terror. Many pointed out how the film cleverly expands its horror palette by introducing multiple entities instead of relying solely on Annabelle. That variety keeps the experience engaging, even when the narrative itself remains straightforward. It's less about surprise and structure and more about creativity and execution. There's also appreciation for the performances, particularly McKenna Grace. Critics consistently highlighted her ability to anchor the film emotionally without overplaying fear. That kind of restraint stands out in a genre that often rewards exaggerated reactions. Her performance gives the film a human center, something that elevates it beyond a series of disconnected scares. But the criticisms? They're consistent too. Familiarity, predictability, a sense that the film is going through well-practiced motions rather than discovering new ones. Some reviewers felt the modular structure, jumping from one haunted object to another, made the film feel episodic rather than cohesive. Instead of building toward a singular, overwhelming climax, it sometimes feels like a sequence of mini-horror scenarios stitched together. And then there's the tonal comparison to earlier Conjuring films. When you put this next to something directed by James Wan, the difference becomes clear. Wan's films often carry a kind of emotional weight beneath the scares, a sense of tragedy, of spiritual conflict. Annabelle Comes Home leans more toward entertainment than existential dread. It's less haunting in the long term, more effective in the moment. For some viewers, that's a strength. For others, it feels like a step down. The cultural response, though, extends beyond critics. Within fan communities, the film sparked a different kind of conversation. Not, is this good? But, where does this fit? The Conjuring universe had, by this point, become one of the most successful shared universes outside of superhero cinema. Each entry adds to a larger mythology, and Annabelle Comes Home functions as connective tissue. It reinforces the idea that the Warrens' world is filled with stories yet to be told. That's why the artifact room resonated so strongly with audiences. It's not just a setting, it's a promise. Every object hints at another film, another story, another nightmare waiting to be explored. Fans didn't just watch the movie, they speculated. Which artifact could become the next spin-off? What histories are hidden behind those glass cases? That engagement extends the film's cultural life far beyond its runtime. Social media amplified that effect. Clips, images, and discussions circulated around specific entities. The ferryman, the wedding dress, the monkey toy. These elements took on lives of their own, becoming miniature icons within the larger franchise. That kind of fragmentation actually benefits a shared universe. It keeps the conversation alive between releases. Still, the film doesn't dominate cultural discourse the way some horror films do. It doesn't redefine the genre. It doesn't spark widespread debate about its themes or meaning. Its impact is quieter, more contained, much like the film itself. It strengthens the foundation rather than reshaping the structure, and maybe that's the most honest way to understand its reception. Annabelle Comes Home isn't trying to be the defining horror film of its era. It's trying to be a reliable chapter in an ongoing story. Critics wanted more ambition. Audiences wanted a good time. The film sits right between those expectations and satisfies one more than the other. But reception, both critical and cultural, only captures the immediate reaction. The real question comes later. What stays? What lingers after the credits, after the discourse fades, after newer films take its place? Because that's where a film's true identity reveals itself in its themes, its legacy, and whether it leaves behind something worth returning to. What lingers after Annabelle Comes Home isn't a single terrifying image or a philosophical gut punch. It's a feeling. A quiet realization that horror, in this universe, isn't something that visits and leaves. It's something that's collected, contained, and always one mistake away from being released again. That idea of evil as something cataloged, archived, waiting, becomes the film's most resonant theme. At its core, the movie is about control versus curiosity. The Warrens build systems to contain darkness, locked cases, Blessed glass. Clear rules. Don't touch, don't open, don't invite. And yet, the entire narrative exists because those rules are broken, not out of malice, but out of human need. Daniela doesn't open the door because she's reckless in a vacuum. She opens it because grief demands answers. That's what makes the horror stick. It's not evil forcing its way in. It's human vulnerability letting it out. And that ties directly into Judy's arc inheritance, not just of knowledge, but of responsibility. She didn't choose this life. She didn't ask to grow up in a house where demons sit behind glass like exhibits. But she's part of it anyway. That's the quiet tragedy running beneath the film. Childhood here isn't about innocence. It's about awareness. She knows too much, too early. And the film never fully resolves that tension. It just shows her learning to live with it. There's also an undercurrent about belief, what it means to accept that unseen forces shape your reality. In many horror films, disbelief is the starting point. Characters don't believe until they're forced to. Here, belief already exists. The characters know the rules, they know the stakes, and still, things go wrong. That shift changes the nature of fear. It's no longer about discovery, it's about inevitability. Knowing something is dangerous doesn't always stop you from engaging with it. Sometimes, it makes the temptation stronger. But thematically, the film doesn't push into deeper philosophical territory the way elevated horror often does. It doesn't deconstruct trauma or explore existential dread in abstract ways. It stays grounded in functional storytelling, cause and effect, action and consequence. And while that limits its thematic depth, it also makes it accessible. The ideas are clear, immediate. You don't need to interpret them. They're built into the structure of the story itself. As for legacy, Annabelle Comes Home occupies a very specific place within the Conjuring universe. It's not the most influential entry, it's not the most ambitious, but it's one of the most structurally revealing. It shows how expandable this world really is. The artifact room isn't just a setting, it's a narrative goldmine. Each object represents a potential story, a potential film, a potential expansion of the universe. And that idea has already shaped how the franchise continues to evolve. At the same time, the film reinforces the franchise's core identity, controlled horror. This isn't chaos-driven terror, it's measured, designed, built around timing, atmosphere, and escalation rather than shock for shock's sake. That consistency is part of why the Conjuring universe has remained stable while other horror franchises burn out. It knows its language, it doesn't abandon it. But let's be honest, this isn't the film that redefines horror. It doesn't challenge the genre's boundaries or reinvent its mechanics. What it does is refine a formula and execute it cleanly. And there's value in that. Not every film needs to be revolutionary. Some need to be reliable, rewatchable, effective in the moment, even if they don't haunt you for years afterward. So who is this film for? It's for fans of the Conjuring universe who want to spend more time inside that world. It's for viewers who enjoy atmospheric horror built on tension rather than extreme imagery. It's for those who appreciate craftsmanship, the layering of sound, design, and performance working together to create a cohesive experience. Where does it fall short? Depth. It hints at emotional and thematic complexity, but rarely lingers long enough to fully explore it. It prioritizes momentum over introspection, and depending on what you're looking for, that either keeps the film engaging or leaves it feeling slightly surface level. But here's the final takeaway. The thing that defines Annabelle Comes Home more than anything else. It understands the power of limitation. One house, one night, one mistake. And from that, it builds an entire ecosystem of fear, not by expanding outward, but by digging inward, by turning a contained space into something unpredictable. And in a genre that often mistakes scale for impact, that's a choice worth recognizing. Not groundbreaking, not unforgettable, but controlled, confident, and quietly effective. Sometimes that's exactly what horror needs. There's a moment in Annabelle Comes Home that quietly defines everything the film is trying to say. Not through dialogue, not through spectacle, but through implication. The artifact room, once sealed and controlled, is restored. The glass cases are closed again. The objects are back in place. Order returns. But here's the unsettling truth. Nothing has actually changed. The danger isn't gone. It's just contained again. And that's the film's final statement. Evil doesn't end. It waits. That idea reframes the entire experience. This isn't a story about defeating darkness. It's about managing it, living alongside it, keeping it locked away and hoping the locks hold. That's a very different kind of horror. Less about victory, more about maintenance. And when you think about it, that's far more unnerving. Because it suggests the line between safety and catastrophe isn't defined by strength, it's defined by vigilance. Judy embodies that realization by the end. McKenna Grace doesn't play her final moments as triumphant. There's no sense of, we won. Instead, there's understanding. Acceptance. She's no longer just the daughter of Ed and Lorraine Warren. She's part of the system now. A participant in the containment of something she can never fully control. That shift is subtle, but it's the film's most meaningful character resolution. And then there's Daniela. Katie Sarif doesn't get a clean emotional closure. Her grief isn't magically resolved. Her guilt doesn't disappear. She simply survives the consequences of her actions. And that's important. The film doesn't punish her in a traditional moralistic sense, but it doesn't absolve her either. It leaves her changed, a little quieter, a little more aware. That ambiguity gives the ending a weight it might not have had otherwise. Even Mary Ellen, played by Madison Iseman, walks away not as a hero, but as someone who endured something she can't fully explain. She started the film as the responsible one, the grounded presence. By the end, she's been pulled into a world that defies that grounded logic. And you get the sense that normal life won't feel quite the same anymore. That's the film's real legacy. Not in its scares, but in its implications. It expands the Conjuring universe not by adding scale, but by deepening its foundation. The artifact room becomes more than a setting. It becomes a symbol of the franchise itself. A collection of stories, each one contained, each one waiting. And as long as that room exists, the universe has infinite directions to go. From a broader perspective, Annabelle Comes Home represents a turning point in how shared horror universes can function. Instead of constantly escalating stakes or introducing larger threats, it demonstrates that intimacy can be just as effective. That a single location, handled with care, can sustain an entire narrative. That fear doesn't need to grow louder. It needs to grow closer. But let's not overstate its impact. This isn't the film that changes horror. It doesn't redefine genre language or introduce groundbreaking techniques. What it does is refine. It takes established tools, atmosphere, pacing, performance, design, and uses them with precision. That kind of craftsmanship doesn't always get celebrated, but it's what keeps a genre alive between its bigger revolutions. And maybe that's why the film remains rewatchable. Not because it surprises you the second time, but because it works. You notice the details more. The way scenes are structured, the way tension is built and released, the way performances carry moments that could have easily fallen flat. It's a film that reveals its construction more clearly on repeat viewing, and that's a sign of thoughtful design. So where does that leave Annabelle Comes Home in the grand scheme of things? Not at the top of the Conjuring universe. Not at the bottom either. It sits somewhere in the middle, but firmly, confidently. A film that knows exactly what it is and never tries to pretend otherwise. And in a franchise that could easily collapse under its own mythology, that kind of clarity matters. Because in the end, Annabelle Comes Home isn't about the doll. It's about the room. The idea that somewhere, behind glass, something is waiting. And all it takes is one person deciding to open the door.